story short, she landed up, being diagnosed with cow's milk protein allergy. And, we had actually a really rough, bumpy road. Was actually really difficult and not at all what I expected. And now our weaning journey has also been not so straightforward, because obviously we have to take into account her allergens. And
for many of us, we create this picture of what it's going to be like. There's an element of grieving that comes into play. Whatever the journey was that we pictured, there is something that is to be said about acknowledging the loss when we face this sort of journey alone and are trying to deal with the grief and the loss that comes with maybe not quite the picture that you had planned. And I think the danger for moms in particular is that there's an element of self-blame or critique on oneself and a lot of feelings of guilt. And I think there's a very almost dangerous, vulnerable potential or aspect that is there that moms can fall into, really becoming quite critical of themselves.
Everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Baby, another exciting episode today. And today we're going to dive right in, and we are going to speak to probably a topic we all have to deal with at some point in our parenting journey, when our expectations don't quite come about as we expected them to. And how do we deal with that? And I know that Sammy and Jenny have got some wonderful insights into this. So welcome, Sammy, and welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Kath. Thanks.
Hi, Kath. Thanks again for having us.
It's always lovely to host this together, and I always enjoy our chats. So, Sammy, as we are in lifetime exploring Kyla's weaning journey, so parents are really getting to know your little home and your little girl really well. So thank you so much always for just making that open to us and available, because I think it's so much nicer when we can really talk in kind of real life. Otherwise, it's just a lot of theory and it's not really that practical.
Absolutely, so, yeah.
I know on your journey, and we have mentioned it a bit on this podcast before, you had little Kyla, and then she was diagnosed with cow's milk protein allergy. So I don't know if you want to just give a bit of context to that, because I think in light of what we're going to talk about, just would be helpful for our audience just to understand that, and just maybe also some just of the feelings and emotions around some of the decisions that you had to take.
Yeah. So basically our journey started really, really well. Kyla was a great feeder from the get-go. And I thought, well, this is brilliant. This is, a dream. This is what I expected, I was hoping for. And, we've gotten off to a good start. And then, it's, even though Kyla fed well, she just wasn't a very happy and comfortable baby. And long story short, she landed up, being diagnosed with cow's milk protein allergy. And, we had actually a really rough, bumpy road. What was supposed to be this beautiful journey was actually really difficult and not at all what I expected. And we were faced with, some really hard decisions. And one of them was ending my breastfeeding journey and putting Kyla onto formula. Because of her cow's milk protein allergy, and because she was just so reactive. And, I had, at the time, a friend who'd, given birth a week or two after me. And, she was also having this great feeding journey. And I just was like, this is what I expected, and now I just had this truths, Bob, that this is going to happen to me. Like the plumber's toilet is always broken. Here's the feeding therapist facing feeding issues. And, it wasn't at all what I expected. I have nephews who had these easy feeding journeys, and I thought that it was going to be the same for me. It started off well, and when I held on to breastfeeding as long as I could, to the point where I think my own mental health was taking a toll, and it was affecting our family dynamic. And we had to have this tough discussion as a family. And like we've said in other podcasts, block out all the noise and the opinions going on around us, and actually just make some decisions that were going to be to the best of our family. And we landed up stopping breastfeeding and putting Kyla onto a very specialized formula. And it was the best decision we could have ever made. And yes, it made our journey turn out to be very different to what I'd expected. And I almost had to mourn the fact of ending breastfeeding, because it was something that I really, really wanted to do. And even though it hurt Kyla so much, she actually loved it. So it was this really horrible situation, because it was something she loved so much and gave her comfort, but at the same time it was making her so sore and uncomfortable. And I really had to mourn that, because it's something that I really didn't want to give up. And I know that if Kyla wasn't sore and uncomfortable, she also would have breastfed for who knows how long. And so, yeah, it was really hard coming to terms with that and saying, you know what, okay, this isn't working. It's not how I thought it was going to turn out. And now our weaning journey has also been not so straightforward, because obviously we have to take into account her allergens. And where I had pictured this journey to just be like, let's throw food at her and it's going to be fun and exciting, I now have to think, okay, I'm going to introduce this allergen, and we'll touch on it in other podcasts, but slowly, and do it as a really systematic approach, which was not what I expected at all. It's not what my nephews had. It's not what my friends have had. And, at times I feel quite sad that that's what we have to go through, and that our journey is not so straightforward as everybody else's. But again, there's a bit of acceptance, and it's like, okay, this is what we've got to do for Kyla. This is what we've got to do to make her comfortable and happy. And our journey is just going to look really different. And, that's okay. And some days I'm like, this is terrible. I'm like, why does it have to be so complicated? And why do we have to go through this and, have these struggles? But at the same time, it's, we look at her and we just are like, well, this is our journey. And it's that acceptance.
Sure. Thanks, Sammy. And we really are just so grateful that you are so willing to just share, because it is real, and I've journeyed with you, and I also know that there were some really hard moments there where I know you've really done it and you've gone on the journey, but it has, I remember it being really, really hard, especially around those difficult decisions you guys had to make, So Jenny, I would love your input here, and just share with us what Sammy's gone through and her experience. Is this kind of what you see when moms have to change course or change direction, or parents have to make a different decision to what they'd originally planned? I don't know if you can just talk to some of the stuff Sammy shared.
Yeah, I think there's so much complexity when it comes to parenthood, and I think this is such a common theme that we see in so many different aspects of parenting. When we think about parenting, for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, the parenting journey starts years and years before we become parents. We create this picture of what it's going to be like, what we're going to name our children, what a wonderful dad our husbands might be. We have all these ideas about what parenthood is going to look like for us in years to come. And not for everybody, but for a lot of people, that's what happens. And while that is a very typical part of the process and a wonderful part of the journey, the flip side of it is that it often then sets us up for very difficult expectations to actually come to fruition. And this is something that we see that is quite common in parenthood, is that we have ideas or expectations that we are hoping to realize that often don't go according to plan. And the difficulty with that is often we have struggles adapting. So we become quite rigid in thinking, no, but this is the way it was meant to be. This is how it should be. I must pursue this road, and I must continue along this road. I must breastfeed because that is what I wanted my plan to be. So sometimes there's difficulty adapting to a new way. So that's one part of the journey that we have to kind of accept. The second part is that there's an element of grieving that comes into play, in that whatever the journey was that we pictured, there is something that is to be said about acknowledging the loss of not that journey. And often down the line and with hindsight, we're able to go, actually it wasn't so bad, or it actually turned out, or maybe it was hard, and that is the reality. We don't know what our post reflections might look like, but we do know that there is an element of coming to terms with the loss of the idea we have versus what is happening in reality. And I always say, if you have two sort of balls, and one is the ideal world, the expectations that we have, and we have the real world here, the further apart these two balls are, the greater the fall, so to speak. So like the greater the adjustment and the difficulty to come to terms with it. The closer these two are together, our expectation versus what's happening, the easier it is to come to terms with. But often we see that as these two get very far apart, this area in between is almost the breeding ground for struggle. And that struggle can look different, but it could be anxiety, it could be postpartum complexities, it can be different for everybody. But often when that idealistic expectation and what's happening in reality are so far apart, it makes us vulnerable to other things that can seep in.
Sure, that's so helpful. And just
Absolutely.
Sammy, just out of interest with Matt's journey, and we will definitely have him on and hear his own voice, but just more the kind of the dynamic from the two of you going on this journey together. And sometimes, dads are maybe they see it from different angles and I think Matt is an extremely involved dad, and I know that because I'm engaged with him as well. But what did you find really helpful about his responses and guidance along the journey of having to look at the way you're going to feed her and what you're going to do and having decisions?
Yeah, so I think both Matt and I are very sort of A-type personalities. We like a plan. We're very systematic, and I think. When I saw our ped for our checkup with Kyla, she also said to me, this whole journey, we've approached it very systematically. So, we had everything in place. And, I think being a mom and all those like hormones and emotions, and especially in those early days where it's that like fourth trimester and that like flood of everything and that overwhelm, Matt was the voice of reason for me and would be like, okay, hold on, let's look at this, let's take a step back. And I remember like, one morning I'd wake up and I'd have like a solution, or if I had a terrible night and Kyla was super uncomfortable, I would have almost like this meltdown, and, Matt was there, and that's sort of like, just hold on, let's take a step back. And we also which really helped us, we put a lot of, like stepping stones in place. So we were like, okay, let's get to this point and then this is going to happen. And it just helped us in the journey to kind of, when things weren't going as planned, was to almost have a plan B, and say, okay, this is how we're going to follow it. Okay, it's not going to how we had planned in the beginning and what we expected it, but how can we make it work for our personalities, and how can we do things to make it easier for us and to accept it more, and that was super helpful. We tackled it together. I'm very blessed to have Matt be so involved and also look out for my well-being. It wasn't just Kyla, but it was also, a huge journey for me as a mom. And he was that person that kind of held that together. And so that, I'll forever be thankful to him. But it was such a huge part of those early decision makings, was having him there and involved in it.
And Jenny, just listening to Sammy and just kind of share the togetherness, maybe just to end this with just one or two thoughts with regards to as kind of partners in this parenting, together with the way you spoke earlier, just managing those expectations and the change in expectations as it shifts from one to another in your explanation. Just maybe one or two tips for partners listening, or how do we approach our partners to request assistance in this space?
Yeah, I think that's such an important part, is, seeking some support. I think when we face this sort of journey alone and are trying to deal with, the grief and the loss that comes with maybe not quite the picture that you had planned, it's very hard to navigate on your own. And I think the danger for moms in particular is that there's an element of self-blame or critique on oneself and a lot of feelings of guilt. And I think there's a very almost dangerous, vulnerable sort of potential or aspect that is there, that moms can fall into really becoming quite critical of themselves and feeling guilty and quite despondent, and obviously the ramifications of that. And that's where the role of a partner is so important, to come in and drown out a little bit of that critical inner voice that moms often have when things don't go according to plan, and really just to be the voice of reason and rationalization, to say that this is not a reflection of, anything that you've done. You haven't done anything wrong, or you couldn't have done it differently to change the outcome here or to change the course that you're on. And so I think that reassurance is so important. I think sharing the load with someone is so important, but I also think sometimes having to verbalize that, to request them to action it, is important. We can't assume that our partners or spouses are able to know that it's such a big thing for us. And we have to be more verbal in how we actually communicate that this is a loss, this is an immense loss, and I'm struggling. And that is something they need to be aware of, so that they can show up and they can step up.
I love that. Yeah, and I think, as we kind of end and land this, is just some key things are just about realness. I think when we're real, and we've said this in previous podcasts, being aware of our reaction, how we're feeling, just helps us ask our partners or ask for support, ask for help, and then go down that journey and just remember that we are good enough and we are doing our best. And that if it hasn't turned out, I like what you say, just having that voice of reason that just says that it's nothing you've done. I always say parents don't intentionally, if you are watching this Let's Talk Baby, you definitely are not intentionally wanting to harm your baby. You're wanting to find out how to be a better parent, how to, just be able to cope on this journey that is changing and moving and shifting, and the goalposts are always moving in a different direction. So you are good enough, and be real, but be vulnerable, and get that support around you. That is really important. Thanks, Sammy, and thanks, Jenny. And thanks everyone for watching, and we look forward to our next Let's Talk Baby.